But some books have said that some people in South Carolina hesitated. They felt around and they asked the North Carolina legislature, what do you want to do? And asked Tennessee, what do you want to do? None of them were quite ready to leave yet, so finally South Carolina said, we're going to leave anyway. South Carolina left the Union. Once South Carolina left the Union, other states slowly followed. The newly left states formed the Confederate States of America. They elected Jefferson Davis. The story was that Jefferson Davis, who was from Alabama, was working this field, and all of a sudden someone galloped up to him with a telegram. They didn't have telephones, so and it said Jefferson Davis turned pale. And his wife went, Mr. Davis, dear, what's the reason? Why are you turning pale? He said, I have just been elected president of the Confederate States. He realized a heavy burden was on him. But anyway, he had been elected president of the Confederate States. There were 7 states. The South are dividing. Now, folk, the last time I went to Stone Mountain, I read that in the state of Georgia, the vote was 52 to 48%, 52% to stay. But the legislators in Georgia said, now wait, with South Carolina and Tennessee and Alabama and Florida leave the Union, we have to leave also or be isolated. So the state legislature overruled the vote of the people and forced Georgia out of the Union anyway. I've not heard that from very many sources, but the last time I was in Stone Mountain, they happened to say that. Anyway, Georgia left the Union also eventually. Several senators tried to compromise. Lincoln opposed the compromises, saying, I pledge myself to stop the spread of slavery, and I'm not going to change that now. Besides, the South was no longer trying to reconcile. They had their taste of freedom. Compromise was just impossible. Lincoln went to Washington, arriving at night. Now, folks, this is a story I told in the first class to liven up a little bit. When Lincoln was elected president, he did not have a beard. He was the most photographed president up to that time. We have a lot of photographs. But some 12-year-old girl in New York wrote him a letter, Mr. Lincoln, you ought to grow a beard. Beards were coming in style fast. Again, if you look at picture presidents, Grant, Garfield, Hayes, Arthur, all these presidents after Lincoln had beards, except for President Johnson. But anyway, she said, you ought to grow a beard. So Lincoln started growing a beard while he was president-elect. Then on his way to Washington, he passed through New York and he said, will the girl who told me to grow a beard please come forward? She was a 12-year-old girl, very embarrassed, but she came forward. And Mr. Lincoln said, well, thank you. I'm so glad to meet you. And as you can see, your advice was listened to, and I'm growing a beard. All right. Anyway, the pictures you see of Lincoln from there on out, Lincoln kept his beard till the day he died. Now, Lincoln was sneaked into Washington. There was a plot to assassinate him. And a certain person said, hey, if you'll sneak in at night, we can protect you. A lot of people did not believe that he could lead the nation in this crisis. So Lincoln gave us the inaugural address. He said, people of the South, we are not enemies but friends. We must not be enemies. In your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, rests the question of war or peace. The South had their cannon trained on Fort Sumter. Now, I'm not going to really start chapter 15. I got about 5 minutes left. But I do want to say a few things before we start. Number one, the Civil War was destined to kill more men than all of our other wars combined. And it was owing to the fact that they were fighting using Revolutionary War tactics, but with rifles that could get off numerous shots, bang, 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 repeating rifles, repeating pistols. They were using 1860s weapons, but 1700s war manuals. And both sides were doing it, and this led to a very, very high casualty rate. In some battles, the casualty rate got up as high as 1/4 or 25%. Or 1/4 of every soldier who went into battle died in a battle, not to mention the wounded. The reason the North won, and I'm not jumping ahead, I think all of you know the North wound up winning. The reason, folk, is, the big reason, the North greatly outnumbered the South. Greatly. Now, Sam Houston, who was a Northerner himself, but he was governor of Texas, but he had to resign because he said, Texas left the Union, and Sam Houston, I'm not going to leave the Union. But he told us, I said, you people, you Southern are better fighters than they are. But they will win because they won't give up. They will win because they outnumber you. Houston died before the war was over, but he's remembered for this statement because it turned out to be so true. Another thing, and then I'll close. The Civil War, folk, was not about states' rights like some Southerners tried to make it. The Civil War was mainly about slavery. How do we know that? Because we have the journals, a lot of journals of the men who fought in it, living and dead, the men who survived it, and also studying the original source of the newspapers of the time and the letters that the soldiers wrote home. On both sides, the issue was slavery. In the South, they were voting to fight for slavery. In the North, they were voting to fight to end it. The number one issue was slavery. And again, if your book opens up with Douglass, who realized sooner than others that the Civil War was, in fact, about slavery. All right, every one of you, have a good weekend, and I hope to see all of you back on Monday.